The transport ship Meridian's Grace died at 2:17 a.m. Galactic Standard Time. Its reactor core breached under sustained plasma fire from 3 Zelthorian destroyers, and in the span of 4 seconds, 832 Sithani souls were converted to expanding spheres of superheated gas and debris. Silth Valanis watched it happen from the bridge of the Wandering Hope, her compound eyes tracking the explosion with the kind of numb horror that came from witnessing too much death in too short a time. She had stopped counting the dead 6 months ago. The numbers had become abstract, meaningless. What did it matter if 80,000 or 90,000 of her people had been exterminated? They were gone. The specific mathematics of genocide felt obscene. Jump coordinates locked, her navigation officer reported. His voice carried the flat affect of someone who had stopped believing in survival. We can reach the target system, but the civilian transports won't make it. Their FTL cores are failing. Silth looked at the tactical display. 17 ships remaining from a fleet that had started with 53, 40,000 people, give or take, crammed into vessels designed for half that number. Children sleeping in cargo holds, elderly dying in corridors because there weren't enough medical supplies. 3 years of running, 3 years of being turned away at port after port, 3 years of watching the Zelthorian Empire methodically erase the Sithani Cooperative from existence. The target system, she said. Tell me again. Earthspace, United Coalition. They joined the Galactic Council 30 years ago, relatively new, potentially sympathetic, or at least not yet aligned with Zelthorian interests. Potentially. The word carried the weight of every failed hope, every closed door, every species that had looked at Sithani refugees and decided that angering the Zelthorians wasn't worth the trouble. Do we have any other options? Silth asked, though she already knew the answer. No, Commander. Life support is failing across the fleet. We have maybe 72 hours of breathable atmosphere left, and that's if we cut rations further. Silth felt the familiar ache behind her eyes that signaled her dormancy cycle was overdue. Her species needed to enter a brief shutdown every 26 hours, a neural reset that consolidated memories and processed emotional trauma. But stress could delay dormancy, force the body to keep functioning on reserves that were never meant for extended use. She had been running on those reserves since the day the Zelthorians had appeared over Synthia Prime and announced their territorial claims. That had been 3 years ago. She hadn't achieved proper dormancy in 3 years. Her thoughts felt like they were moving through thick syrup, and sometimes she couldn't remember if something had happened yesterday or 6 months ago. But she was alive, and so were 40,000 of her people, and that meant she didn't get to rest. Set course for Earth, she ordered. All ships, maximum sustainable speed. Commander, if they refuse us, then we die in their space instead of dying here. Either way, we're done running. Engage. The Hope's engines flared, and 16 other ships followed her into the dark, limping toward a star system that might offer salvation, or might simply be the place where the Sithani Cooperative finally ended. The alert reached Earth Station Unity at 3:42 a.m. station time. Lieutenant Oren Dax had the overnight watch, tracking routine commercial traffic through near-Earth space, when his long-range scanner array lit up with 17 contacts moving at civilian FTL speeds. The energy signatures were wrong, too erratic, like ships held together with determination and desperation. Dax enhanced the scan and felt his stomach drop. Hull breaches on multiple vessels, atmosphere venting, drive cores operating at dangerous instability. These weren't ships. These were coffins that hadn't stopped moving yet. He pulled up the identification transponders, Sithani Cooperative. He ran a quick database search and found the council notice dated 3 years prior. Territorial dispute with the Zelthorian Empire, decided in favor of the Zelthorians due to superior military claims. The notation was clinical, bureaucratic, and utterly silent on what happened to the 2.3 million Sithani who had lived in the disputed territory. Dax didn't need the database to fill in those blanks. He had been in the Coalition Navy for 12 years. He knew what territorial dispute decided by superior military claims meant. He opened a priority channel. Commander Dax to Director Crane. Sir, I apologize for the hour, but we have an immediate situation. Director Nikolai Crane was already awake when the call came. He had been staring at casualty reports from the Jovian mining incident, 17 people dead because a safety inspection had been delayed by budget cuts. 17 people whose deaths he could have prevented if he had allocated resources differently, fought harder with the Council for Infrastructure Funding, made different choices 6 months ago. He took the call from his office overlooking the Pacific Ocean, where the United Coalition headquarters stood as a monument to humanity's unified government. That unification had come at a price, old national identities subsumed into something new, but it had been necessary. A divided Earth couldn't have functioned in the galactic community. "Report," Crane said. Dax briefed him in terse military language. 17 vessels, 40,000 life signs, life support failing, Sithani refugees fleeing Zelthorian extermination, maybe 72 hours of air remaining across the fleet. Crane pulled up the information on his own display as Dax spoke. The Sithani looked like humanity's evolutionary nightmares, insectoid and compound-eyed, but the data showed a peaceful species known for precision engineering and nonviolent conflict resolution. They had been systematically destroyed because they occupied space someone else wanted. "Invite them to dock at Unity Station," Crane said. "Emergency protocols. Get me Admiral Halifax and Counselor Torvald. And Dax, get our medical teams ready. I don't care what council procedure says about processing timelines. Nobody dies filling out paperwork." "Yes, sir." Crane disconnected and sat in the dark of his office, looking at the photo on his desk. His grandmother, age 14, standing in a displaced persons camp in 2047. She had survived the Pacific Rim ecological collapse, watched her parents die of radiation poisoning, spent 6 years in that camp waiting for resettlement. She had told him once, near the end of her life, that the worst part wasn't the hunger or the danger. It was the waiting. The feeling that the world had forgotten you existed. He had joined the coalition to make sure that never happened to anyone again. Now, he had about 72 hours to prove it meant something. Admiral Desmond Halifax arrived at Crane's office 30 minutes later, his uniform crisp despite the early hour. He was a career military officer, 28 years in the service, and he carried himself with the precise economy of motion that came from living on warships. Halifax had fought in the Belt skirmishes, commanded the defense of Europa Station during the Corsair crisis, and earned his reputation through competence rather than political maneuvering. He also had the uncomfortable habit of being right about things Crane didn't want to hear. 40,000 refugees, Halifax said without preamble. We don't have the capacity. We have the space. Space isn't capacity, Director. Do you know how many ships I have in immediate deployment range? 35. Do you know how many the Zelthorians can field? Their standing fleet in this sector is 12 heavy cruisers, and they can call in reinforcements within a week. If they decide to reclaim their territorial fugitives, we can't stop them. You're saying we turn them away? I'm saying we need to think strategically. The Luna colonies are already stretched thin. Mars settlements are dealing with their own resource issues. If we take in 40,000 refugees, we're committing to feed them, house them, and protect them. That protection means pulling our fleet assets from other duties. New Meridian is already running on minimal security because we don't have enough ships to cover every mining operation. Crane stood and walked to the window. Dawn was breaking over the Pacific, painting the water in shades of gold and red. So what do you suggest? We tell them to keep flying until their life support fails and they all suffocate? I suggest we follow council protocol. We take them to processing facilities, we verify their claims, we check them against criminal databases, and we integrate them over a reasonable timeline. 10 to 15 years, standard procedure. 15 years in camps. 15 years alive, Halifax countered, which is better than dead, which is what they'll be if the Zelthorians decide to enforce their territorial claims and we can't defend them. Director, I understand the impulse to help, but we have to protect our own people first. That's not cruelty. That's responsibility. The door opened before Crane could respond. Counselor Senna Torvald entered, carrying a tablet and looking like she had already been awake for hours. She probably had been. Torvald ran the integration office with mechanical efficiency, and she had learned long ago that humanitarian crises didn't respect normal working hours. I've reviewed the initial scans, she said. 40,000 people. We processed 800 new immigrants last year through standard channels. You understand we don't have the infrastructure for this. We'll build it, Crane said. With what timeline? Integration isn't just housing. It's education, job placement, cultural orientation, legal status verification, medical screening, psychological evaluation. These people have been traumatized. They're going to need support systems we don't have. So we create them. Torvald set her tablet down with more force than necessary. Director, I've been doing this job for 11 years. I've seen integration programs fail. I've watched well-meaning policies create ghettos and resentment because we moved too fast and didn't prepare properly. If we rush this, we hurt everyone involved. How long? Crane asked. How long what? How long until they're processed through standard channels and integrated into coalition society? Torvald hesitated, and in that hesitation, Crane saw everything he needed to know. 12 to 15 years, she admitted. Maybe longer if there are complications. They have 72 hours of air. Then we stabilize their life support and move them to proper refugee facilities while we process. No. Crane's voice was quiet but absolute. No camps, no facilities, no 15-year holding patterns. Halifax straightened. Director, we're granting them citizenship, all 40,000 of them. We're doing it in 48 hours. The silence that followed was profound. Torvald spoke first. That's not possible. The background checks alone. We'll do biometric scans for identity verification and medical screening for immediate health needs. Everything else we can figure out after they have legal status. You'll destroy the integration framework. The framework is designed to protect bureaucratic ass covering, not people. We're changing it. Halifax's expression hardened, and when the Zelthorians show up demanding we hand over fugitives from their territory, then we tell them these aren't fugitives, they're our citizens, and we protect our citizens. With what? Good intentions? Director, this is military suicide. You're starting a war we can't win to protect people we don't know over territory that isn't ours. Crane turned to face him fully. Admiral, what would you do if the Zelthorians showed up demanding we hand over Luna colonists because they decided that Moon belonged to them now? I would tell them to go to hell. Why? Because those are our people. In 48 hours, so are the Sithani. Halifax stared at him, jaw tight with frustration. You're going to get people killed. Maybe, Crane acknowledged, but I'd rather risk death doing the right thing than guarantee survival by becoming the kind of species that turns away refugees to save ourselves the trouble of helping them. He looked at both of them, these professionals who had dedicated their careers to making the coalition function, who understood the practical limitations of resources and political reality. He needed them. But he needed them to understand this wasn't negotiable. I'm not asking for your approval, he said quietly. I'm asking for your help. 40,000 people are going to die if we don't act. I don't know if we can save them. I don't know if this will work, but I know we have to try. So please, help me. Torvald picked up her tablet. Her hands were shaking slightly. I'll need complete access to every available residential unit in coalition space, and I'll need authority to commandeer civilian resources. You have it. She nodded and left without another word. Halifax remained, his expression unreadable. I'll position the fleet for maximum defensive coverage, but Director, when the Zelthorians come, because they will come, I need you to understand something. Good people are going to die for this decision. Our people. Humans who signed up to defend the coalition, not to fight wars over alien refugees. Make sure you can live with that. I'll have to, Crane said. Halifax saluted, a gesture that felt more like acknowledgement than respect, and departed. Crane sat alone in his office and tried not to think about his grandmother in that camp, waiting 6 years to be told her life could start again. He wondered if she would think he was doing the right thing or being a fool. He suspected she would say both were true. The Sithani fleet docked at Unity Station over the next 6 hours. Silth Valanis watched from the Hope's viewport as human crews swarmed over her damaged ships, sealing hull breaches, connecting power transfer cables, rushing medical teams through airlocks. The efficiency was impressive. The compassion was terrifying, because compassion meant hope, and hope meant vulnerability. She had learned not to hope. A human voice crackled over the comm. Wandering Hope, this is Station Commander Dax. We're ready to begin transfer operations. Medical cases first, then families with young, then general population. We've got processing centers set up in cargo bays 3 through 7. Processing for what? Silth asked. She kept her voice neutral, but her thorax tightened with familiar dread. Processing usually meant camps. Citizenship applications, medical screening, identity verification. We're doing this fast, so please bear with us. It's going to be chaotic. How long will we remain in processing? There was a pause. 48 hours, then you're citizens with full legal status. Sylth felt her legs weaken. She reached out to steady herself against the console. 48 hours? That's the plan. Look, I know it sounds impossible, but Director Crane has authorized emergency protocols. We're going to make this work. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why are you doing this? Another pause, longer this time. When Dak spoke again, his voice was gentler. Because you need help, and we can give it. That's enough. Sylth closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw the Meridian's grace exploding. She saw the other ships they had lost, the colonies that had burned, the children who had died in her arms because she couldn't save them. She saw 3 years of running, 3 years of doors closing in her face, 3 years of being told that helping her people wasn't worth the political cost. Thank you, she whispered. Welcome home, Dak said. The processing began at 8 a.m. station time, and within the first hour, Senator Torvald knew they were going to fail. The plan had seemed rational in Crane's office at 4 in the morning: set up biometric scanning stations, run basic medical checks, issue temporary ID chips. Simple, efficient, fast. Reality was messier. The Sithani required specific atmospheric composition, different from standard human mix. The cargo bays had to be reconfigured with environmental controls, which took time. The medical scanners weren't calibrated for insectoid physiology, which meant doctors were working half-blind. The ID chip insertion points that worked for humans didn't work for Sithani anatomy, requiring modified equipment they didn't have. And then the first deaths happened. Torvald was reviewing processing numbers when the emergency medical alert came through. Cargo Bay 5, Medical Station 3. She ran. When she arrived, she found chaos. Medical staff were performing emergency resuscitation on a Sithani elder, while family members made high-pitched, keening sounds that spoke to grief in any language. The doctor in charge looked up as Torvald approached, his face pale. Anaphylactic shock, he said. He had an allergic reaction to something in the station atmosphere. We didn't catch it in the initial screening. Will he survive? The doctor shook his head. By noon, they had lost 40 Sithani to atmospheric complications, all elderly, all with compromised respiratory systems that couldn't handle the minute chemical differences between station air and their ship environments. Torvald authorized emergency environmental modifications, pulling engineers from other projects, but it was too late for those 40. Sylth Valanis stood in the medical bay, looking at the bodies of her people laid out under thermal sheets. She had survived 3 years of war, crossed light years of space, brought 40,000 people to what she thought was safety, and now 40 of them were dead because humans had tried to help. I'm sorry. The voice came from behind her. She turned to see Director Crane standing in the doorway. He looked exactly like she felt, exhausted, guilty, and too stubborn to quit. You were trying to save us, Sylth said. We killed them. The Zelthorians killed them. You just couldn't prevent it. She gestured at the bodies. How many of us would have died if you had sent us to refugee camps? How many would have died waiting 15 years for processing? How many children would have grown up in cages, told to be grateful for our imprisonment? Crane was silent. 40 people, Sylth continued. 40 deaths is a tragedy, but 40,000 deaths was the alternative. Don't insult their sacrifice by suggesting we should have chosen the alternative. I should have anticipated the atmospheric issues. You're not gods. You're just people trying to help other people. It's messier than anyone wants it to be. Sylth looked at the bodies again. Will you continue the processing? Yes, we've adjusted the protocols. We won't lose more this way. Then we continue. She straightened, her posture shifting from grief to determination. My people need to see you succeed. They need to see that not everyone in the galaxy is the Zelthorians. Please, keep trying. Crane nodded and left her to mourn. The news from Deep Space Monitoring came at 2 p.m., and it confirmed Halifax's worst predictions. 12 Zelthorian warships had entered the outer system, moving at combat speed. ETA, 10 hours. Halifax stood in the Fleet Operations Center, watching tactical displays update in real time. 35 human ships, mostly destroyers and frigates, against 12 Zelthorian heavy cruisers. The math was ugly. Zelthorian vessels were purpose-built for war, thick armor and devastating weapons. Human ships were newer, more maneuverable, but lighter armed. They could hurt the Zelthorians. They couldn't beat them. He opened a channel to Crane. Director, we have incoming hostile contact. Zelthorian Battle Group 12 cruisers. They'll be in firing range in 10 hours. Can we hold them? Halifax appreciated that Crane asked if they could hold, not if they could win. At least the director wasn't delusional. For a while. We'll take casualties, heavy casualties. If they're committed to recovering the Sithani, this becomes a siege. Recommendations? Pull back the civilian population on Unity Station. Move the Sithani to the belt colonies where they're harder to target. Fragment the fleet to make concentrated attack runs difficult. We fight a delaying action until Council pressure forces Zelthorian withdrawal. That assumes the Council will intervene. It assumes a lot of things, Halifax admitted, but it's our best tactical option. Do it. And Desmond, thank you for not saying I told you so. I'm saving that for after we survive this, Halifax said and disconnected. He began issuing orders, moving ships into defensive positions, prioritizing fire corridors and overlapping coverage zones. His tactical officers worked with practiced efficiency, but Halifax could see the tension in their movements. They knew what was coming. At 3 p.m., the Zelthorian fleet broadcast on all frequencies. The voice was deep, resonant, and utterly confident. This is Commander Kreth Voller of the Zelthorian Imperial Fleet, operating under territorial enforcement mandate. I am addressing the United Coalition. You are currently harboring approximately 40,000 Sithani fugitives who are wanted for violation of territorial agreements and theft of military technology. These are not refugees. They are criminals fleeing justice. Under Galactic Council Charter, you have no legal authority to grant them asylum. Surrender them for trial, and we will depart peacefully. Crane listened to the transmission from Unity Station's command center. Theft of military technology. It was a new accusation, probably fabricated, but it gave Voller legal cover. The Council was very good at looking the other way when you had a plausible excuse. Commander Voller, Crane replied, this is Director Nikolai Crane of the United Coalition. The individuals you refer to are not fugitives. As of 6 hours ago, they are Coalition citizens. They are under our protection. We will not surrender them. You are protecting war criminals. We are protecting our people. I suggest you verify your intelligence regarding the alleged theft. We have reviewed Sithani records and find no evidence of military technology acquisition. Our evidence is classified. How convenient. Crane kept his voice level. Commander, let me make our position clear. What you call criminals, we call citizens. If you attack them, you attack us. I don't think either of us wants that war. Voller's laugh was harsh. Director, I have 12 heavy cruisers. You have 35 light vessels. This isn't a war, it's an equation. Stand down, or I will solve it. Then solve it. But understand that every human ship you destroy, every coalition citizen you kill, every member of our species that dies defending the Sithani will be remembered. The galaxy will know that the Zelthorian Empire slaughtered thousands to reclaim refugees. How does your government feel about that kind of publicity? There was a long pause. Crane imagined Voller consulting with his political officers, running calculations about acceptable losses versus diplomatic costs. You have 6 hours to comply, Voller finally said. After that, I will begin bombardment of Unity Station. Your civilians should evacuate while they can. The channel closed. Halifax immediately opened a comm to Crane. We need to evacuate the station, now. Agreed. But the Sithani stay in processing. We're not half finished with citizenship verification. Director, if we pull them off the station, Voller can claim they're not really citizens yet. We finish processing. All 40,000 in the next 6 hours. Halifax wanted to argue, wanted to point out that legal technicalities wouldn't matter if everyone was dead, but he recognized the look on Crane's face. This wasn't negotiable. I'll buy you the time, Halifax said. Make it count. The processing accelerated to barely controlled chaos. Torvald pulled every available staff member, ran multiple scanning stations simultaneously, cut every non-essential verification step. Medical checks became visual assessments unless someone showed obvious distress. Integration orientation was reduced to a 30-second recorded message. Sylth moved through the processing centers, helping her people understand what was happening. Many were traumatized, confused, unable to comprehend that citizenship could be granted so quickly. Some refused, certain this was a trap. Sylth had to convince them, one by one, that humans were genuinely trying to help. At 5 p.m., reports came in from Luna. The colony's civilian council had voted 7-4 to refuse housing allocations for Sithani refugees. Their public statement was blunt. "We have been requesting infrastructure expansion for 3 years. We have families waiting for residential units. We cannot support the coalition's decision to prioritize alien refugees over human citizens." The news spread through social media, igniting protests. Human colonists on Luna marched through the main habitat dome, carrying signs that read, "Humans first," and "Our resources for our people." It wasn't organized hatred. It was exhausted people who felt abandoned by their own government, watching resources flow to outsiders. Crane watched footage of the protests and felt the ugly weight of impossible choices. The Luna colonists were right. They had been waiting. They had legitimate needs. But so did the Sithani, and their needs were measured in hours until death rather than years until housing allocation. He opened a channel to Luna's governor, a woman named Petra Wolf who had served in colonial administration for 20 years. "Governor Wolf, I've seen your council's decision. Director, my people are angry. They feel betrayed. I can't force them to accept refugees they don't want. Can you ask them to reconsider?" "I can. It won't change the vote." Wolf's expression softened slightly. "Director, I understand what you're trying to do. But charity has to start somewhere, and my colonists feel like they've been forgotten. They've been asking for help for years, and the coalition told them to wait. Now you want them to give what little they have to strangers. You see how that looks?" "I see it. But Governor, those strangers are about to become citizens, our citizens. If we start dividing people into worth helping and not worth helping based on species, what does that make us?" "Practical," Wolf said. "Director, I'm sorry. Luna won't take them." The channel closed. Crane stared at the blank screen and realized that even if they survived the Zelthorian attack, the real fight was just beginning. At 7 p.m., the Zelthorian fleet advanced into attack range. Halifax had positioned his ships in a defensive sphere around Unity Station, overlapping fields of fire, every available gun focused outward. It was textbook defensive formation, and it wouldn't be enough. "All ships, weapons hot," Halifax ordered. "Stand by for hostile contact." His tactical officer looked up from her console. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission, not from the Zelthorians. It's Prillian." "On screen." The image that appeared showed an elegant being with flowing cranial tendrils and eyes that suggested deep intelligence. Halifax recognized her from diplomatic files. Lissa Tenmar, the Prillian Confederation's senior ambassador to the Council. "Admiral Halifax," she said, "I wanted to inform you that a Prillian fleet is approaching your position. 8 warships, ETA 20 minutes. We are interpreting the Zelthorian action as a threat to Council stability and are authorized to intervene." Halifax felt something loosen in his chest. Not hope, not quite, but at least not absolute certainty of death. "Ambassador, your government is willing to fight the Zelthorians over this?" "My government is willing to uphold the principles of sanctuary and protection that the Council is supposed to represent. What the United Coalition is doing should not be radical. It should be normal. Your species is showing us what we should have been all along. We're still outnumbered. Not as badly as you were." Tenmar's expression grew serious. "Admiral, I cannot promise we'll win, but we can try. That seems to be the human way, yes?" "It is," Halifax agreed. "Welcome to the fight, Ambassador." The transmission ended. Halifax pulled up tactical projections with Prillian reinforcements included. 43 ships against 12. The odds were better. Still not good, but better. At 7:30 p.m., processing hit a critical mass problem. 3,000 Sithani were packed into Cargo Base 6, waiting for final citizenship verification. The environmental controls, already strained, began failing. Temperature spiked, humidity dropped, the atmospheric mix shifted outside safe parameters. Sithani began collapsing. Torvald was there when it happened, watching her carefully organized system disintegrate into panic. Medical teams rushed in, trying to stabilize victims of heat exhaustion and respiratory distress. Engineers rerouted power, disabled non-essential systems, diverted every available resource to environmental controls. One of the Sithani, a young male barely into adulthood, grabbed Torvald's arm. His mandibles clicked rapidly, the sound of someone trying to speak through oxygen deprivation. She couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. "Help us." "Get them to Cargo Bay 4, Torvald ordered. "Now, move everyone." They evacuated 3,000 people through narrow corridors while environmental systems failed around them. 27 Sithani died in the chaos. Torvald watched them die and wondered if Crane's impossible timeline was killing more people than it saved. But they kept processing. What else could they do? At 8 p.m., Halifax received updated intelligence on the Zelthorian fleet. They were advancing in attack formation, weapons charged, shields maximized. This wasn't posturing. This was commitment to violence. He opened fleet-wide comm. "All ships, prepare for engagement. Target priority is protecting Unity Station. If we lose people, we lose the battle anyway, so stay alive. Make them pay for every meter." His second-in-command, a captain named Yuki Strand, spoke quietly. "Sir, if we win this fight, what do we win? More refugees? More conflicts? Where does it end?" "I don't know," Halifax admitted, "but I know what happens if we lose. We become the kind of people who hand over refugees to save ourselves. I've seen a lot of ugliness in my career, Captain. I don't want to add that to the list." Strand nodded. "Then let's not lose." The Zelthorian fleet opened fire at 8:14 p.m. Plasma bolts streaked across space, targeting the human defensive perimeter. Halifax's ships returned fire, their lighter weapons concentrating on specific targets, trying to overwhelm shields through focused assault. The first human casualty came 2 minutes into the engagement. The destroyer Valiant took a direct hit to its reactor housing, and the ship breached catastrophically. 320 people died in the initial explosion. Another 80 survived in sealed compartments, trapped in a dying ship. Halifax watched it happen on his tactical display and felt the familiar, cold calculation of combat. Mourn later, win now. "All ships maintain formation. Concentrate fire on their trailing cruiser. Bring it down." The human fleet focused their weapons, and the targeted Zelthorian cruiser's shields flickered under sustained bombardment. But Zelthorian return fire was devastating. Another human ship, the frigate Steadfast, lost engine power and began drifting. A Zelthorian cruiser fired on it methodically, targeting life pods as they launched. Halifax watched and felt rage building beneath his tactical calm. This wasn't war, this was execution. At 8:35 p.m., the Prillian fleet arrived and immediately engaged. 8 warships, larger than human vessels but smaller than Zelthorian cruisers, poured fire into the enemy formation. The tactical balance shifted. Suddenly, it was 51 ships against 11 Zelthorian cruisers because the combined fire had destroyed one. But the destruction continued. Human ships were dying, their crews being vaporized in spheres of expanding plasma. Halifax watched the casualty reports climb: 500 dead, 800 dead, 1,200 dead. On Unity Station, the Sithani could hear the battle through the station's hull, distant thuds as weapons fire impacted shields and armor. Sylth stood in a processing center watching humans continue their work despite the war happening above them. A young human woman was scanning a Sithani child, speaking gently, trying to make the terrified youngling feel safe. Sylth felt something break inside her. These humans were dying to protect her people, dying to defend refugees they had known for less than a day. It was insane. It was beautiful. It was everything her cynical, traumatized mind had forgotten was possible. She made a decision. Sylth opened a station-wide comm to all Sithani. "This is Valanis. I need every engineer to report to Docking Bay 12 immediately." 200 Sithani engineers arrived within 5 minutes. Sylth addressed them in their own language, rapid clicks and harmonics that human translators struggled to process. "Humans are dying for us. We're going to return the favor. I need repair teams, systems specialists, anyone who can work on damaged ships. We're going out there." One of the older engineers objected. "We're not soldiers. We don't know human systems." "We're precision engineers," Sylth countered. "We can fix things half-blind and improvise with materials we've never seen before. That's our specialty. These humans gave us citizenship. Now we act like citizens." They suited up in borrowed human EVA gear and launched in utility shuttles toward the damaged human ships. Halifax watched the deployment on his tactical display and opened a channel to Unity Station. "Who authorized the Sithani to launch into a combat zone?" "No one," Torvald replied. They just went. Their leader said something about returning favors. Halifax wanted to order them back. Instead, he watched as Sithani engineers boarded crippled human ships and began performing emergency repairs with terrifying efficiency. They bypassed damaged systems, rerouted power through improvised connections, and got weapons back online in minutes when human crews had estimated hours. Within 20 minutes, 4 ships that Halifax thought were combat ineffective were back in the fight. At 9:12 p.m., Halifax's flagship took critical damage. A Zelthorian plasma bolt punched through the forward shielding and vaporized the bridge's port side. Halifax felt the deck lurch beneath him, heard the scream of depressurizing atmosphere, and had exactly enough time to think this is it before emergency bulkheads slammed down. He was thrown against a console, felt ribs crack, tasted blood. Around him, crew members were dead or dying. His tactical officer was gone, just gone, vaporized. His helmsman was screaming, pinned under debris. Halifax dragged himself to a functioning console, his vision blurring. He opened Fleet Comm. "This is Halifax. I'm transferring command to Captain Strand on the Relentless. Continue engagement." Strand's voice came back immediately. "Sir, what's your status?" "Bridge is destroyed. Ship is crippled. I'm ordering evacuation." "Negative, Admiral. We need you." "You need command authority. You have it. Now finish this fight." Halifax cut the channel and looked at his dying ship. They had taken almost the entire crew complement off the Valiant's wreckage. He'd made sure of it. Now it was his turn to abandon ship. Except there were still people alive in engineering. He could see them on the internal sensors, trapped by collapsed bulkheads, slowly losing life support. Halifax was supposed to evacuate. He had transferred command. His duty was to survive and continue leadership. That's what military doctrine said. He headed toward engineering instead. By the time he reached them, 2 of the engineering crew were already dead from smoke inhalation. The remaining 5 were barely conscious. Halifax dragged them one by one to the escape pods, his broken ribs screaming with every movement. He got 4 of them loaded. The 5th was trapped under a collapsed support beam. Halifax tried to lift it, but his damaged body couldn't generate the strength. He looked at the young engineer, a kid barely 20 years old, and saw terror in her eyes. "I'm not leaving you," Halifax said. She tried to speak, coughed blood instead. Halifax braced himself against the beam, using leverage and desperation. The metal shifted. Not enough. He pulled harder, feeling something tear in his chest, and the beam lifted just enough. He dragged the engineer free and shoved her toward the pod. "Go!" he gasped. She went. Halifax turned to follow, but the ship lurched violently. Another hit. The corridor between him and the escape pod collapsed. He was trapped. He opened his comm one more time. "Strand, this is Halifax. I'm trapped on the flagship. Can't reach the pods." "We're coming for you, sir." "Negative. No time. Ship is breaking apart." Halifax coughed, tasted more blood. "I'm positioning the wreckage between Unity Station and the Zelthorian cruiser Vollers on. Use it for cover. And Strand? Don't let this be for nothing. Finish processing those refugees." "Sir?" "That's an order. Halifax out." He closed the channel and sat on the dying ship's deck, watching through a viewport as the battle continued. He had been wrong. About the refugees, about the risk, about whether this was worth human lives. He had spent weeks arguing against Crane's plan, certain it would end badly. But sitting here, watching human and Prillian ships fight alongside each other to protect 40,000 people who had nowhere else to go, he realized something. There were worse things than dying. Living as the kind of person who abandoned refugees to save yourself was one of them. The flagship exploded at 9:47 p.m. Desmond Halifax died instantly, along with 17 crew members who hadn't made it to the escape pods. His sacrifice bought Unity Station 15 critical minutes of cover. Crane watched it happen from the command center, saw the tactical marker that represented Halifax and 300 crew members blink out of existence. He felt something inside him crack, like ice under too much weight. He had given the order that led to this. He had committed humanity to this fight. Those deaths were his responsibility. But the processing continued because that's what Halifax had died for. At 10:30 p.m., the tide turned. The combined human and Prillian fleet had whittled the Zelthorian force down to 7 cruisers, but at devastating cost. 16 human ships destroyed. 3 Prillian vessels crippled, over 3,000 human casualties, another 800 Prillian dead. And then the long-range scanners picked up new contacts, multiple ships, dozens of them. For a moment, Crane thought the Zelthorians had called in reinforcements and this was over. Then the identification transponders resolved. Corvalin Assembly, Teluvian Compact, even Hegemite Defense Forces. The Council was intervening. Kreth Voller watched his tactical display and understood he had lost. Not the battle, he could probably still destroy Unity Station if he committed fully, but the war. The political war that this had become. If he fired on the station now, he would be starting a conflict with half the Galactic Council. He opened a channel to Crane. "This isn't over, Director. You have made an enemy today." Crane's response was immediate. "No, Commander. We made 40,000 new friends today. You just recognized them. Safe travels." The Zelthorian fleet withdrew at 11:15 p.m., and the battle was over. The processing finished at 1:27 a.m., 29 hours and 27 minutes after it began. All 40,000 Scythani had been granted coalition citizenship. The cost had been 67 Scythani dead from medical complications, 3,047 human military casualties, 823 Prillian casualties, and enough political upheaval to shake the Galactic Council's foundations. Crane stood in the command center, watching casualty reports scroll across screens. He had saved 40,000 lives. He had cost over 4,000 others. The math was simple. The morality was not. At 3 a.m., new reports came in from the outer colonies. New Meridian had been attacked by Zelthorian raiders while the defense fleet was committed to protecting Unity Station. 412 miners dead. The colony administration was demanding answers, demanding accountability, demanding to know why alien refugees were worth more than human lives. Crane read the reports and felt the full weight of command settle on his shoulders. He had made choices. People had died. Other people had lived. There was no clean victory here, no moment of pure triumph. Just consequences and responsibility and the knowledge that he would have to live with this forever. Sylth found him there at dawn, standing alone in the command center while the station slowly came back to life around them. She didn't speak at first, just stood beside him, looking at the same casualty reports. "Was it worth it?" she finally asked. Crane thought about Halifax, dying on a broken ship. He thought about the Sithani children who would grow up free instead of in camps. He thought about the Luna colonists who felt betrayed. He thought about the new Meridian families mourning their dead. "Ask me in 10 years, he said. "What if the answer is no? Then we'll live with it, together." Sylth nodded slowly. "My people want to help with station repairs, and we need to send a delegation to New Meridian, to apologize, to mourn with them. They died because of us. They died because the Zelthorians are genocidal, and we chose not to help them do it," Crane corrected. "But yes, we should go to New Meridian, together." They stood in silence for a while longer, two leaders trying to process what they had just survived and what it would cost going forward. At 6 a.m., station sensors detected another contact entering the outer system, multiple vessels, broadcasting refugee distress signals. The tactical officer looked up, her face showing exhaustion beyond anything physical. "Sir, we're reading approximately 200,000 life signs, multiple species. They're all requesting the same asylum the Sithani received." Crane stared at the display. 200,000, 5 times what they had just processed. The fleet was crippled. Resources were depleted. Unity Station was barely functional. They couldn't possibly handle this. Counselor Torvald entered the command center, looking like death reanimated. She saw the display and closed her eyes. "Director, we can't. We barely survived the last one. We don't have the capacity. The infrastructure is gone. The fleet is destroyed. This is impossible." Crane thought about Halifax's sacrifice, about the 67 Sithani who died seeking safety, about the 4,000 humans who had fought to protect people they didn't know, about his grandmother in that camp, waiting 6 years to be told her life mattered. He thought about what humanity was supposed to be, what they had promised themselves they would become when they reached for the stars. "Get me Mars Colonial Administration," he said quietly, "and the Belt communes. Every settlement we have, we're going to need a lot more housing." "Sir." "Send the incoming fleet docking clearance, Counselor. Tell them welcome home." Torvald stared at him with something between horror and awe. "You're really going to do this?" "We set a precedent," Crane said. "Now we have to live up to it." He turned back to the viewport, watching the distant lights of approaching ships. Ships full of desperate people who had nowhere else to go, coming to Earth because humanity had proven they would help even when it was hard, even when it was costly, even when it might destroy them. This was going to be impossible. It was going to strain every resource they had. It would cause political crises, economic disruption, and probably a dozen disasters he couldn't predict. And they were going to do it anyway, because that's what it meant to be human. To look at an impossible problem and say yes instead of no. To choose compassion over convenience. To stand up and do the right thing, especially when it was hard. The sun rose over Earth Station Unity, painting the damaged hull in shades of gold and red. Below, on the planet's surface, 40,000 new citizens were waking up to their first day of freedom. Above, in the black of space, 200,000 more were coming. Nikolai Crane stood at the window and watched them approach, carrying the weight of all the lives he had saved and all the lives he had cost. And he thought about the choice he had made and would make again and would keep making as long as refugees came to Earth seeking shelter. Welcome home, he thought. Welcome home.